Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K-12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Shimbari, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. Technology is really changing the game when it comes to teaching and learning. We see school districts trying to ban technology, whereas in others, those districts have figured out not to dismiss the negative attributes that come with technology, but have figured out how to harness the positives in terms of how we can be manipulating and using technology to help students learn, not only to help them learn better, but to actually engage them more in their learning. And one area where technology and digital learning in particular is changing the game is in project development. As again, many of my listeners know, we've done episodes on project-based learning. And so tonight we're going to continue that theme of talking about project development and using projects as a form of assessment with our students beyond the paper and pencil test. But what's going to be different about tonight is we are going to be focusing on digital projects and how perhaps you as a teacher can be bringing that into your teaching practice. Because this is our topic tonight, there's probably very few people better, no one better than my next guest. He is John Arthur. He's a sixth grade teacher in Utah, the 2021-22 Utah Teacher of the Year, a National Teacher of the Year finalist, who's been teaching for 12 years and has really harnessed the power of technology and digital learning, particularly when helping students to create digital projects, be those podcasts, music videos, creating documentaries or other forms of videos. Hopefully this will give you, the listeners, some creative ideas of things to do with your students to show their level of mastery beyond the paper and pencil test. John, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
It is my pleasure.
Could you tell us a little bit about your journey as a teacher and how digital projects became your thing? John is the author of a new book titled The Digital Projects Playbook. So again, great person to have on the show discussing this.
I'll share a story from my first year of teaching because it's really my entry into this world of not only digital projects, but really what I am is someone who believes with all his heart in empowering student voices. And digital projects are just my favorite means of taking a kid and helping them see the brilliance that's inside of them and then share their message with the world. So during my first year teaching, I've taught 12 years at the same elementary school. It's Meadowlark Elementary in Salt Lake City. We're a Title I school. And when I came in, we were in turnaround status, which meant we were in the bottom 5% of schools in the state of Utah. And so there was a lot of pressure to get those good test scores, get the kids higher on reading and math. And I was doing all I could to be a good teacher, not only to my students, but in the eyes of my administration and everybody. And it wasn't until later in the year that I realized that I had failed to deliver on some of the promises I made to myself when I was a pre-service teacher and a student in grad school learning this craft. I'd promised myself that I would come into the classroom and I would dedicate my work to uplifting kids and uplifting a community. And I realized in the spring of my first year that I hadn't done that. I had not taken my kids and given them the kind of rich learning experience that I promised I would. And it really came to a head when I was driving to work one day and I was listening to this news story about this ferry boat that crashed off the coast of South Korea. I'm half Korean. My mother's from South Korea. That alone connected me to the story. It made my ears perk up. But it was tragic because this boat ran ashore ran into some shallow water, and slowly tipped over the course of about 2.5 hours. And the captain and the crew of the boat told everybody, stay in your cabins, don't come out. And then they immediately left the boat. They jumped into the water, swam to safety aboard these boats around. And about 150 people used their critical thinking skills and said, this is crazy. We have got to get off the boat. This boat is sinking. And they jumped in the water and they were saved. But about 250 high school students drowned because they stayed in their cabins. They did what they were told. They didn't feel empowered to make a choice that was obviously better for themselves, for their lives. And they went down. And all across Korea, these walls became decorated with their pictures and these golden ribbons, lamenting the fact that these beautiful young people had lost their lives. And they just didn't feel like they had a voice in that situation. I came into school. I was upset by the story that I'd heard. It's sad. It's a human tragedy that these young people just went down with the ship, didn't say anything, voice any concerns or opinions that changed anybody's minds. That is tragic. And I realized I've not taught my students how to use their voices in a powerful way. I taught them some critical thinking, but I never taught them how to critique my thinking, how to say, I'm not 100% sure that what you're saying right now is right. And I want to challenge you on it. I never taught them to do that. And I swung the pendulum way in the other direction. I made everything the rest of that spring about empowering my students' voices and getting them to take ownership of their learning. And at one point I asked them, so what do you guys want to do? What kind of work do you want to do together? And they said, we want to make a music video. I said, great, let's do that. What kind of music video? What do you want to make a music video about? And they said, story problems. I said, oh my God, you guys are such nerds. All right, fine, story problems. That's great. This is your video. You're in charge. What song do you want to use? And they hashed it out and they finally said, we want to use a One Direction song. You can do this, but you have to make me a promise. So we will at some point work into the lyrics of this song that you're in charge of your learning. You make it about story problems, but you want to like really emphasize the fact that you are in charge of your learning, and that's what the thesis of this project that you're going to do. And they went forward, they wrote this thing. I held the camera, and they made this music video about story problems. And it's fantastic and inspired a lot of people. We also read this poem Invictus by William Ernest Henley, and the best two lines from that poem are, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." And I was like, those are great lines. You should write something like that and put it into your story problem song. And they just lifted those two lines, put it right into the song. But hearing 11-year-olds sing, we're the masters of our fates, captains of our souls. It was just the most beautiful thing ever, and I became addicted. That was it. I was hooked, and from then on, I didn't go crazy for the rest of my career about empowering student voices, but I did make a commitment to it. From then on, the main question that I've always asked myself is, instead of asking how much content can kids consume in 1 year, I now ask, how much content can my kids create? Now I'm committed to try and convince other teachers to do the same, because I've seen the incredible power it's had in my students' lives and in my professional life. And I just want to share the joy. I want everyone to experience how fun it is to see your kids not as students in class, but as creators at work.
Think you're the first guest I've had that has actually sung on the show. That's testimony right there for the power not only of digital projects to elevate student voice, but even to excite educators. On that note, John, one of the things you mentioned is how it does elevate that student voice. So this gets right into that next question I like asking folks, which is the why. What's the big why around why we need to move to this form of assessment? Again, you've already mentioned voice. What are
Mm-hmm.
other reasons why we want to move towards project-based learning and digital projects in particular?
In the book, I dedicate some time to the research that I did on project based learning, personalized competency based learning, and multimodal learning. And basically, what it all boils down to is these types of learning systems where kids are creating and thereby demonstrating their mastery of content or skills. This is not only the best way of understanding how well a kid understands something, way better than multiple choice tests and such. Getting them to produce something with their knowledge and their understandings gives you not only a truer sense of what they've actually mastered, but when it comes to motivation, collaboration, the 21st century workplace skills that are so critical that we're told that these kids need to develop, the most natural, authentic way to develop them is to give kids a project and thereby a purpose, something that they are connected to personally and something that they can invest their energy and enthusiasm into, the same way that you can hear it in my voice that I've invested in mine into this. And the reason why I lean so heavily into digital projects is because this is what excites Gen Z and Gen Alpha, the kids in my class. This is not only the language that speaks to them, the tools that they feel most comfortable with, but these are the ones that they use outside of school on their own. And when you ask kids, what is it that you want to be when you grow up? At least half of them are going to say influencer, YouTuber, TikToker, content creator. Even if they say doctor, they really mean like doctor who makes TikToks. There's an inherent integration of this technology into their lives and their identities. And we as educators need to start leveraging that to help them develop a more personal connection to these important things that we're teaching them in school. And digital technology and digital tools are the perfect bridge to get them to plug into what we're trying to get them into, not just what they're personally seeking. One good thing about the pandemic was that we had all of these technological tools given to us as life rafts and life vests at the time, but that we can still use. We're talking over Zoom. I became a Zoom master because of the pandemic, and my students now use this same platform to conduct interviews for podcasts and to communicate with mentors who help them with their writing and other work. This is amazing. We've been given a treasure trove of technological tools, and it's time that we start using them to the benefit of our kids' education and embracing the idea that if you put these tools into a kid's hand and point them in a direction, they will go and use these tools effectively to produce beautiful, brilliant pieces that we can then be proud of and want to help them share with the world.
There was something that you said that triggered a memory from a previous guest. So I had
Mm,
Jose Bowen on the show in season one talking about why we need to actually use AI in learning. One thing, I believe it was him who said this, was, are we teaching our students their future, or are we teaching them our teacher pasts?
yeah.
So when you're talking about the fact that Gen Z, Gen Alpha, that this is how they communicate. These are the tools they use in their daily life. What you were saying really is, in a sense, meeting the students where the students are at. Now, with that said, that leads me to a two-part question. What does a teacher who, let's say, is a Gen Xer or a millennial or even a boomer, if they're still teaching, who doesn't feel as confident in leading or facilitating work that is digital, how can they still introduce this in their classrooms when they're not very facile with it, number one? And number two, if and when they get over that hurdle, what are some of the best digital projects to start with?
I appreciate this question so much because it leads me straight into a plug for my book. The Digital Projects Playbook, a step-by-step guide to empowering students as creators, is exactly where you want to go. I am not a digital native like my students. I'm technically an elder millennial, and this stuff doesn't come natural to me. It was my students' idea to wander into this digital landscape, and I've had a lot of learning to do along the way. I had to create rubrics and project descriptions and reproducibles for myself. And then, especially after I was named Utah's 2021 Teacher of the Year, and I began doing more keynotes and workshops around the country, I would bring all these a Google Drive full of PDFs and Word docs and everything else, and it was just clunky. And I just wanted so badly to have all of the scaffolds that I had created for my students to make this work manageable for me as an older person working with young people. I wanted to be able to bring that all in a one-stop shop and give it to my peers. Thankfully, what the fine folks at Solution Tree have allowed me to do, they've supported me in putting this all into a book. So when you open up this book and you say, you know what, I'm not ready for music videos and stuff, but I can help kids. I can imagine doing blog posts with a kid, because a blog post is just a 5 paragraph essay that you put online. This is a transformation of a classic assignment. You have a kid create a website, let's say on Canva, which is where my students tend to do it, and then you just copy and paste a Word doc into Canva, and now it's a blog post. That's manageable. And the book goes step by step from pre-project to the end of the deal, the end of the project, guides you all the way through. This is something that every teacher can do. If I can do it, you can do it too. And the other thing that I'm going to say about this is, I'm going to just tell a quick story. In my second year of teaching, I had a student who came to me, and they'd written a 5 paragraph essay. They'd taken all this time, invested their energy into it, and turned it in. I gave it back to him, and the kid said, what do I do with it now? I've given you the feedback. That's kind of the end of the cycle. We done here. If you don't want it anymore, you can toss it. Just the look on his face, the disappointment about, I put all this time into it. It kind of broke my heart a little bit. And that's when I started to think about what I could do, not just with music videos, but with things that my students write. I did paper portfolios. Those are great, but they get lost in the sands of time. And my students now, they get done with a story or an essay and they really believe in it. They feel good about it. They add it to their student website, and then they can share the link on their Snapchat with the world so that people can come check out what they wrote. They can share their hard work with an online audience. And that thing that used to become recycling at best is the digital piece that kids can continue to share and come back to. It's not just a project. The digital landscape is a place where they get to keep their work, and they can go on YouTube and watch their music videos. They can go on to all these places and be re-inspired by this thing that they cared about a lot when they were 11 and 12.
The fact that it is digital and other
Hmm.
people are looking at it, it has a life of its own, especially
Exactly.
if you generate conversation around your piece. How do other people, what resonates with them from your piece? So it doesn't quote unquote die or end, but
Hmm.
that work
Hmm.
generates further thought, further engagement, and can allow other people now to take your knowledge and spin it in a different direction.
Totally. And to your question about where should you start, turning written pieces into blog posts is the first place I would say. But we also, a lot of teachers feel somewhat comfortable having students create PowerPoint presentations, for example. And now with the click of a button, a student records that, and it's a webinar. You can just post it on your website, and it's got the video connected to the presentation. And instead of it just being a thing that a kid presented in class, now it's a presentation with information they can share with everybody. And the lift for teachers on that is so low. It's a very simple thing to teach kids to do. Again, the instructions are all there in the book. I have this very special brand of pride that I feel when I see kids doing great things in front of other adults or other kids. I call it megaphonic bliss. It's the kind of bliss that you get when you take somebody's great work and you put it into a place where, as you were saying, not only can other people receive it, but it could become part of a bigger conversation, and your student can contribute in a way that makes other people excited and gives other people a new thing to think about. And you see that reaction, and you see the look on your kid's face, and you just, it's that megaphonic bliss. It's the bliss that you can only get as an amplifier of the work of young people. It's a special thing to take a kid and not just have a student teacher relationship, but a creator amplifier relationship with that young person, it brings new meaning to this work that we do.
John, you consult across the country
Hmm.
about digital projects and helping educators to create these with their students. What have you seen around the country that has really excited you in terms of digital projects that other schools are creating or other students at these schools are creating?
When I think about that question and the way that you framed it, like schools, I'm saying, I've been invited by individual schools and districts to deliver workshops, but most of the most powerful things I'm seeing are still happening in isolation, in individual teachers' classrooms who have embraced the idea that this is work that they ought to do, some of whom are doing so despite a lack of support from administration. And that's why I'm so committed to championing this work, is because it's still too rare. I have a friend who is in Kentucky. He was the 2021 Kentucky Teacher of the Year. Shout out Donnie Piercy, who does awesome things with his students. He's embraced AI and is using it to have his students engage with digital tools in exciting ways. There's another teacher on the West Coast who is using podcasts to tell the stories of indigenous communities and treating kids as change makers, folks who can solve problems, not just report on the issues that are facing their indigenous community. I am most inspired by the kids who embrace this work and see themselves as leaders with voices that matter. All around the country, teachers are embracing this, but when you think about how beautiful what I'm describing is and how real it can be for the kids, it's not enough yet.
You also said something in your last comment that seeing individual teachers around the country
Hmm.
embracing the power of digital projects for their students. You also intimated, and I actually agree with you, that some administrations might not actually be supporting teachers who are taking these risks, these positive risks. What are some of the arguments, whether justified or not, why particularly administrations are
Hmm.
so afraid of embracing digital learning?
I'll stick to this digital project lens in particular, but there are folks who get into administration coming from a world in which this is all foreign and strange and uncomfortable, and so they resist it. Some people would look at digital projects as a waste of time. So much time gets spent making a video, let's say, or recording a podcast, and how much of a positive impact is that going to have on test scores, which is how we hold members of our system accountable. And for me, my answer is if you look at my kids' test scores, my kids perform well above average, especially within the demographics that we represent. Title I students in a low income community, they crush most assessments relatively. Their growth scores are crazy. And the reason is they are more invested in their own education than most kids are. They see the point of coming to class because their voice matters there and they get to create things with the knowledge that I'm trying to connect them to that have meaning in their life. Some of the other fears are also in this environment, socially and politically, that there are people who are nervous about the idea that young people would be sharing their voice at all. Like they look at education, they say we gotta get back to basics, reading, writing, arithmetic, and all this other stuff. It's woke, it's activism, it's blah 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 blah. And that's frankly mostly nonsense. I can't speak for everyone, but I do know that there's nothing to be scared of in helping young people feel like they have a say in what should and should not be in our society. That's anything we've suffered from a lack of social studies instruction and civics instruction. We've leaned, in my opinion, too heavily into just math and literacy because we've been responding with a sense of urgency and we're scared about what scores are saying. But when I look at For example, having been the teacher of the year during the pandemic, I was more scared about how little folks in society were understanding the science and the arguments that were being made that were discounting sound research and evidence-based solutions and practices, and also how people couldn't conduct themselves in conversations. And we had across the country people trying to scream down school board meetings and storm uh, public meetings in uncivil ways. And it reaffirmed to me that the things that my kids are doing are critical. Learning how to carry on a civil discourse with research and evidence, and having done their homework behind whatever it was that they were saying, and thinking before they posted anything and put out their perspective, recognizing that especially as young people, if they don't come right, then they will be too easily discounted and dismissed. What we need these digital projects for most of all is to help our kids connect as future leaders, as citizens, as the people that we're going to count on to solve the problems to come, because it's clear that our schools have not prepared our current cohort of adults to do that work at the level that we should. And so while I acknowledge and appreciate fears that folks have around greater digital integration into our school system, the longer we wait to do this right, the more it's going to cost us.
You were talking about some of those fears that administrators have. I'll give you
Mm-hmm.
another one that I've heard. Doesn't mean
Mm-hmm.
I agree with it, but the other one that I often hear is, well, how are we going to grade that? How do you grade that project? Take us through how to use digital projects as assessment. A, how do you use it as assessment? And B, how do you grade it?
I would say that we've been doing this a long time. If you've ever had to grade a 5 paragraph essay, you understand that rubrics are the way. We solved all this a long time ago. You grade a digital project the way you grade a science project in the science fair. You create a rubric that can be applied objectively to different projects. You can look for specific criteria that will demonstrate mastery of either the concept or of the skill of creating the thing that you are hoping to have them create. And then you apply it accordingly. In my book, I have 6 projects. Each chapter is a project, and then there's some pre work to help get kids and the teacher ready to do those projects. But every project opens with a rubric, and you can see how I do it in my class for each of those projects, but then you can decide what is most important to you. As a teacher, I look at my standards for whatever content I'm teaching, and then I go from the standard to the rubric and determine, okay, according to this standard, this is really important, this is really important, this is what a 3 would look like, this is what a 2 would look like, this is what a 1 would look like. And then I evaluate my students' work the same way that a woodshop teacher would evaluate a birdhouse, or any other teacher since the beginning of time has evaluated anything produced by a student, whether it's a song or an essay or anything else that just came out of the mind of a student onto some medium, whether it's paper or the air, and you evaluate it. This is not a hard problem. This is something that we've been doing forever, and that's the beauty of this work now. We're not reinventing the wheel. There's new technology that is empowering people to exercise their voice in new ways. We've already figured out a lot of these solutions. Now we just have to be brave enough to recognize that we can do it with tools that will also send our students' work out farther and will allow other people to engage with it too, and recognize that there are communities eager to engage with our kids' work. And if you want to know whether or not a video is successful or a song is successful, you post it on a platform, you see how much conversation it generates and how many reactions it gets from an audience. I have my students make flip videos, and they can like the videos that they think are the best, and those get more popular and more interactions than others. The way you evaluate this work is the way we evaluate anything in life outside of the schoolhouse. and our over reliance on bubbles and scantrons, multiple choice and short response tests that we have today, the further we get away from those, the closer we get to the better and truer pedagogy and practice that our kids deserve.
And your conversation also reminds me of one that I had with another guest. So I had Royan Stoyer on, and he is from Magnify Learning, and he talks about the power of project-based learning in general.
Mm-hmm.
And even he says it's not a waste of time. It's not just a fun activity, but it does go back to what your standards are. You base your projects, be they digital or non-digital, on what the standard is. If a student is showing mastery of content and skills that standard is asking students to demonstrate mastery on, does
Yep.
it really matter if it's from a paper and pencil test or a project? And actually, it probably matters more that it is a project because, to your
Mm-hmm.
point, students are much more vested in that.
Exactly. And projecting with my students talking about immigration, there were 5 or 6 writing standards that I weaved into that project that my students were working on, and social studies standards as well. There was a social studies standards in sixth grade that said students will understand their rights and responsibilities in the interconnected world. And there's no better way that I can imagine young people demonstrating mastery of that standard than acknowledging current issue and engaging through these writing standards and through this poetry and through this music and putting it out there and actually having it move the conversation, move the needle on this debate that was being had about immigration and the value and humanity of this community. And when it comes to that work, one, I'm hitting those standards, but two, kids are hitting those standards while championing their families.
It's never been easier to do this because I know folks are probably listening going, wow, this is a lot of work. And yes, one does need to put a certain amount of work into it up front to make sure that the project is a valid one. But it's funny you're talking about this because the other day I was consulting in a school, coaching in a school, and I
Mm-hmm.
was meeting with the social studies teachers in a PLC in their PLC time. And their task was to take a look at the New Jersey social studies standards
Mm-hmm.
and see where there was alignment with general writing standards. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, rather than you reinvent the wheel, I said, why don't you use ChatGPT to first break down the standard by content and skill, and then ask ChatGPT to create a 4-point rubric on the writing that can be generated from that standard. To your point about having a rubric, and I will add this, the other thing that ChatGPT did was we asked it to create an exemplar of a writing piece that meets that standard at a level 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm not going to lie, I do think project-based learning or digital projects take time.
Yeah.
But again, at least time to plan them right. But we have the tools to do it. And it's time well spent if our students are more engaged. If they are engaged and loving what they're learning and learning from each other, isn't it worth that investment in time? That's a very open-ended question.
Well, it's open-ended, but it's universally true, John. If I look at my marriage with my wife, if I wanted to do something that required less of an investment of time, I could probably maybe slide by, but there wouldn't be the joy and meaning in my married life. But if I take the time, plan out a trip with a clear purpose and a lot of meaningful pieces built into that, it's going to take me more time, but we're both going to have a better time on that journey. More. That's what project based learning is all about. Yeah, you have to invest time, but the ROI on that investment, the return on that investment is so much higher than spending less time and getting nothing out of it.
So educators have that high impact, that high ROI, return on
Mm-hmm.
investment. What pitfalls do you want to tell folks to look out for as they get excited about doing digital projects with their students?
There are lots of pitfalls. You ever see the movie Rounders? It's a poker movie. There's a line in the movie where an older poker player says to a younger player, "I gave you the book written on the back of my bad beats." Basically, I made all these mistakes and I took that wisdom of the fallen, I gave it to you. And now you're making those mistakes. Why are you doing that? I gave you the book. The book that I've made is literally built on the pitfalls that I've either fallen in or that I've seen. Not to gratuitously plug it, but there are a lot of things that you got to be very careful about. Media release forms with kids, if you're going to put kids online, being incredibly careful, especially in this age where we are hypersensitive about student data and privacy issues. There's a lot of places where you could get into a lot of trouble if you just if you moved without thinking first about it. In the book, I share a lot of the ways that you deal with that, how you create a media release form or use one from your district or from the state office of education, wherever it is that you teach, to make sure that parents are on the same page as you, everybody's informed, admin is supportive because here's how you lay it out. Here's all the research that you need to prove that this is not only fun, but this is best practice. All the arguments are laid out there for you. The biggest pitfalls that I've run into beyond those possibly legally terrible ones are ones where projects will start to eat up too much time because I didn't plan appropriately, for example, editing and knowing how long it would take kids to become comfortable with software. And there are pitfalls around having kids collaborate if you have not taught them how to effectively and positively engage in group work together. And there's suggestions in the book to help make that more successful for you if kids aren't used to working together in a film crew or a podcasting recording crew. They have to use tools that maybe they are or maybe they are not comfortable with. When they have to start talking to interview subjects and know they have to learn how to ask really good questions. These are challenging things that can take more time than you expect. There are ways to work around all of that, but those are also just natural. They're just going to happen at times. And so there are suggestions on how you roll with the punches when you do end up in that situation. But these are the same pitfalls that we face in our classrooms with everything else that we teach. Things run long, things don't work, new tools that we don't know how to use. At least when you're doing these digital projects, you are failing at something that the kids are going to enjoy and care about.
Now, John, is there anything we haven't talked about that you want listeners to know?
I really just want to hammer home the fact that while this kind of work, these digital projects, this project-based learning is meaningful for kids, I just want to say again that when it comes to retaining teachers, making a move towards this beautiful work is, for me, one of the best solutions in our toolbox. Money that you can wring out of a state legislature. There's only so many changes to curriculum that you can convince district leadership to make. There are only so many things in our control. And choosing to move your classroom in a direction that is going to be more joyful and meaningful for you can be the difference between staying in the profession and seeking life elsewhere. And I'm all in on it. In my classroom, I've got this neon sign that says creators at work. That refers to the students, but that also refers to me. I've gotten so much joy out of creating these materials for my students and helping them problem solve. It's one of those things that oftentimes we don't get in our classrooms, especially if we're teaching in really structured systems. This is that sweet medicine for you as an educator. I really genuinely love my work. Tomorrow I'm going to go into class and my students are working on these landform presentations, be transforming into little podcast episodes, but then they're also working on these community wellness projects where they are looking at issues in our local community that they want to do a podcast and short documentary about. And they're partnering with kids at the high school who are in this Latinos in Action class. And so we're doing these projects together. And at the same time, my kids have gone into Minecraft education and designed Camp Half Blood from the book Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. All these things. I'm stoked on that.
Where can people find out more about you and this amazing work that you are doing?
The book you can find on Solution Tree or on Amazon. Again, Digital Projects Playbook. If you want to connect with me on social media, Ninth Evermore, number 9th Evermore, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, all those good places. Ninth Evermore. I'm also on LinkedIn as John Arthur, NBCT, because I'm a national board certified teacher. I can't wait to meet folks.
Thanks again for your time today, John. This has been a great and fun and engaging conversation.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.